Looks like a side of cattle. Especially this bulge here. Reminds me of like a side of beef. Yeah, it just looks like it was given steroids. All GMO. Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to Treehouse Off-Road. My name's Finn. Thanks for watching. In this video, I'm going to address what I believe to be the weakest link in the first gen Sequoia if you plan on really off-roading the thing, and that is the front diff. The first gen Sequoias and Tundras use the same front diff as the Tacomas and Forerunners of the same era, and it's small. It's a 7.5 inch ring gear, and I started having problems with mine as soon as I went up to a 35 inch tire. This project ended up becoming a series of many sub-projects. It all had to be done in a very specific order. Like I couldn't do this until that was done, but I was waiting for this to get done, so I did this while I wait. It took forever. So I think the easiest way to present this information to you guys is to put the truck up on the lift, and we'll just take a look at the front diff, and I'll break down everything into categories, and then I'll make a chapter for each category. And I'll do the best I can. Some of it's going to be out of order, and that's just the way it is. There it is. I've taken it on 2 off-road trips so far, 0 issues. Here it is from the back. To fit this diff, I had to modify the oil pan. I also had to raise the drivetrain 2 inches. And to do that, I had to raise the body. And you can see that right here. I did a 2.5 inch body lift all the way around. Okay, so that's where we'll start. Chapter 1 will be the body lift. Chapter 2 will be the drivetrain lift. You can see the engine mount spacer right there that I built. And there's the other one, you can just barely see it. There is a transmission spacer that's yet to be painted. And then there's a steering shaft spacer right here. And while I'm doing those 2 things, I'm searching for somebody who can help me shorten the intermediate shaft. Now the intermediate shaft, for those that don't know, is the shaft that stretches from the carrier inside the pumpkin to right here that the CV plugs into. It's a steel shaft, transmits power to the CV. And all these IFS Toyotas have them. That needed to be shortened substantially. And then also the intermediate shaft housing, this guy right here, from here to here, needed to be shortened. The second gen Tundra diff overall was 7 inches wider than the factory Sequoia diff. As that search is happening, I needed to figure out this end of the situation. The CVs on the second gen Tundra are much larger than the first gen Tundra CVs. The easy thing would have just been to cut a second gen Tundra CV right here. I could weld the 2 halves together. That way this half would plug into the diff, and I wouldn't have to change anything from this point over. But once I saw the beef that was the second gen Tundra CV, I knew I needed it. I knew I wanted it, and I knew I'd be building my own spindles. The reason I couldn't just use a Tundra spindle is because, as you can see, this is a rear steer, meaning the steering rack is behind the front wheels. Well, on the second gen Tundra, they changed that and put the steering rack in front. I ended up using a passenger spindle on the driver's side and a driver spindle on the passenger side. That would put my brakes in front where I needed them to allow me room back here to design my steering setup. So, custom spindle fabricated out of 1/4 inch steel, which brings me to the lower ball joint. Again, totally different on the second gen Tundra. On the second gen Tundra, the ball joints are actually in the control arms themselves, pointing down. There's obviously not room on this first gen Sequoia lower control arm to put a ball joint. On this part of the project, I took a page from Camberg. What Camberg Racing does on their long travel kits is they make an adapter plate out of steel that houses a 1.5 inch Uniball. I didn't copy them entirely because the geometry wouldn't be correct, but I did use their idea. Thank you, Camberg. So for the footage of building the spindle to make sense, I'm going to show you how I built this first. So this will be chapter 3, lower ball joint. Chapter 4 will be the spindles. Then we'll move on to the diff. First, I'll show you the process of shortening the diff. So chapter 5 will be shortening the intermediate shaft. Chapter 6 will be shortening the intermediate shaft housing. Chapter 7 will move on to the diff and getting the diff into the truck, building all this plate, getting these mounting points built. 1, 2, 3. I had to modify this mounting bracket, so that'll be a little chunk thrown in there. I will also throw in this ADD actuator delete, which leaves this thing spinning full time. The drive shaft was easy. I just needed to change one of the ends, so I'll show you how I did that. Brake lines, so I had to change those out. So there it is. That's how I'm gonna lay it out. I'm gonna do my best to get through it and not have you guys bored. Maybe I'll show you real quick what was happening to my front diff, problems I was having with it when I went to 35 inch tires. Basically, I was breaking stuff. I was breaking these. I was breaking these side gears and the spider gears. And I was breaking them a lot. I switched the gears out 3 times and I got tired of doing it. If you want to know why I just didn't solid axle swap this thing, I didn't want to. It's been done. People have done it. I love solid axles, but I also love IFS. I love it to death. I wanted to learn, I wanted to challenge myself, I wanted to get out of my comfort zone, and I wanted a badass 9-inch front diff in my IFS Sequoia to go with that monster 10.5-inch diff I got in the back. I'm also a glutton for punishment, so I'll stop yapping and let's get into the video. Removing the first body lift kit I did and replacing it with one I made. Okay, here's the new body mount, 2.5 inches. It's installed all the way around. I have to admit it is a little much for my taste, but this is all for the greater good. This is all for a cause. I'm just gonna have to trust the process. All right, so now I got the body raised up 2.5 inches. Time to raise the drivetrain. I bought a used engine mount off eBay so I could get the dimensions, and then I cut out and welded some engine mount spacers out of 3/16-inch steel. For the transmission spacer, I used 2-inch square 1/4-inch wall stock that I cut and welded back together into the shape of a rectangle with a hole through the middle. Okay, we're up under the truck. The front diff is removed, obviously. I'm going to start jacking. Alright, we got both motor mounts in. There's the passenger. Driver transfer case mount lined up. Okay, and now if we go up where the diff used to be, we have a giant pocket of empty room. I may still have to cut into this guy a little. I may still have to clearance the oil pan a little, but I'm perfectly willing to do that. I also had to make a steering shaft spacer, and for this I used aluminum round stock, 2.5-inch diameter, again from eBay. Driver motor mount spacer, passenger motor mount spacer, steering spacer, transfer case cross member spacer. Here's a couple pictures from when I first tried to mock up the diff. At this point I knew it was going to take some work, but I was determined to get it in there. So I had a buddy shorten this intermediate shaft for me. He took 6 1/4 inches out of the middle of this. I will throw up some pictures of the design he came up with. So John is a machinist who hails from the race car world. He thought the best plan would be to make male and female splines on the shaft, press fit them together, and then weld around them. I was a little skeptical, but this thing has held up great so far. He also told me this Toyota steel is the hardest stuff he's ever had to machine. Got the shaft welded. Here are a couple shots of my friend Michael TIG welding the shaft. The bearing got burnt out during this process, obviously, but I planned on replacing it anyway. This was a big moment and a huge victory in the project because so much else was riding on this shaft being completed. So the next step is to take 6.5 inches out of the housing. It's cutting it very close. The only way to do that accurately is to make sure this is absolutely 100% level and doing it in a bandsaw. So I cut myself a big piece of 1/4-inch steel, and I'm gonna make a jig so I can slice it here and then slice it here, and then have a friend TIG weld those together. This face is milled. This is perfectly flat, so I do want this facing up so that I can get an angle of it. So this is the basic idea of the jig. This piece will be welded at a 90-degree angle. This piece is on top just so I can get a decent measurement. So if you look right now, 0.20, if we put it up here, 4.20. So we got to make some sort of bracket that holds this guy up. Alright, so I got the front diff put back together, trying to figure out if we're ready to weld the housing. So in its natural position, the housing oriented like that. I gotta bevel these edges so my buddy Michael can weld this thing up for me tomorrow. Say hello. Michael Bailey is a friend and a coworker of mine. He's one of the best fabricators I know, and without his help welding the shaft and the shaft housing, I'm not sure what I would have done. Multiple passes on here. At this point, I had a decision to make regarding CV axles and uprights, aka spindles. Once I saw the Tundra CV, I knew that's what I needed. It looks to be about 50% bigger in every aspect than the stock CVs. Joints, the stars, the race, the cages, the ball bearings, the axle shafts. It's all massive. Same size they use on the Land Cruiser 200 series. Once I decided I wanted to make custom spindles, I got to work making a jig. Since this is my daily driver, I couldn't just take it apart, so I went back to eBay and got a first-gen Sequoia spindle. Then I made a jig to locate all the crucial areas: the lower ball joint, the upper ball joint, the hub, and the steering. The hub will remain faced up against this, but it'll probably slide up 1.5 inches. And then I just wanted this as a reference point, but I don't know. I might end up doing something different, but this is here in case I need it. I did have a few things to consider though. For one, the 2nd-gen Tundra lower ball joint design is completely different from the 1st-gen Tundra. It's a beefed up version of the Tacoma or Forerunner of that same era. I decided to go with a 1.5-inch Uniball and made a plate out of 3/4-inch steel to support that Uniball. This is what my Uniball lower ball joint starts out as. A piece of 3/4-inch steel that I get off eBay, of all places. Here's my template. I'll trace it. Made on a box of Honey Crispy Oats. Can't afford the real cereal. I spend too much money on my goddamn truck. I'm drilling these holes there so that the metal dust from the hole saw has somewhere to escape to. It's a technique that works really well when you're cutting through thick material. This was a $25 hole saw bit from Amazon, and by doing it this way I was able to cut through both 3/4-inch plates before it died. The size difference between the 7/8 inch Toyota ball joint and the 1.5 inch Uniball is crazy. This brass slug from CarTech helps keep the Uniball cup from warping when you weld on it. This thing is hot. So what I'm doing here is I'm clearancing the inside edge of this Uniball cup so that my wheel doesn't interfere with it. So on this lower ball joint, since I had to grind so much material away, you can see where the Uniball cup meets the steel. So I'm going to grind some of this out and hit it with another weld. I'm really glad I chose to go this route. I no longer have to worry about the stock lower ball joint problem, and the strength gain is just monstrous. Plenty of articulation. This phase of the build started as most other phases do, with a trip to eBay, where I purchased a used OE 2011 Tundra spindle. What I'm after here is a chunk of metal that I can attach the unit bearing, brake caliper, and lower ball joint to. Everything else can go. So here we go. We got the jig. We got the piece that I cut up from the 2nd gen Tundra spindle, and a 12-point aircraft bolt. This is the stover nut that I'll use at the very end. For now we're using this guy. Put together our lower ball joint. Mushroom goes on top. Misalignment goes on the bottom. Bolt goes through everything. Okay, so that's put together. This is now centered and located. This is centered and located. For the top of the spindle, I went ahead and cut the actual top of the spindle off a Gen 1 Sequoia. First piece of the spindle, I'm happy with that. I'm gonna tack it. So these are all the cardboard templates from the first upright I made. This one should go together just like the other one, and hopefully they'll be symmetrical. I'm getting really good at cutting out these pieces by hand. This all probably took me about 15 minutes. There's piece number 2. All right, we're on to number 4. 4 goes right here, blocks off the speed sensor. All right, I got it all jigged back up, and I'm gonna lay some of these inner welds, and I'm actually gonna flip it like a rotisserie, start working on the top. Alright, so I did that bottom pass, the middle pass, and then the 2 side passes. I didn't get all the way up to the top. That area is tricky. I need to still get a SPC slug in there, so I gotta be super careful, and I'm gonna do it with this bolt removed. While this is cooling down, I can start working on getting the piece ready for the tie rod end. Here's the piece of the lower ball joint that I want to attach. It looks weird to me, I'm not gonna lie, but I am trusting the process here. It worked out on the other one just fine. Alright, so that guy's tacked on there pretty good. And that is the last piece on this spindle that needed to be located. I am gonna now box in this side and the bottom. Some anti-spatter on the machine surfaces. Here's the bottom piece. This is a common place for the stock spindle to break. Even if they're gusseted, it's a really good idea to weld a strip of 3/16 along that edge. Here I'm using my Harbor Freight sandblaster to get in all the nooks and crannies before I paint it. There she is. Here I am just fitting the slugs for the SBC upper control arms that I've been using. They have not filled me yet. They've been through hell and back, and on top of that, they're extended 3.5 inches. I'm an SBC believer. Now, this part was pretty nerve-wracking because there's no going back from here. I'm drilling out the lower ball joint taper to a 1-inch diameter hole, and I found this stainless steel bushing on Amazon with a 1-inch OD and a 3/4 inch ID, perfect for the aircraft bolt that I'll be running through this lower ball joint.
How much are those Uniballs?
An unexpected but very pleasant surprise I got was a brake upgrade. Second gen Tundra calipers are bigger, and take a look at how much bigger the second gen rotors are. This thing brakes like nobody's business now.
I don't nap, generally speaking.
It's a shame this is going to be covered up with skid plates because this is just one badass looking diff. This thing attaches at 3 points, just like the 7.5 inch diff. It's got a front passenger mount, a front driver mount, and then a rear mount. I've been obsessing over the placement of this thing because it's so tight. And I know it's going to move a little bit. The points of interference are right here, and right here. You can see this has been hit a few times. Now it's just time to drill out the hole for the rear mount right there, and I'm terrified to do it. I'm gonna drill a hole, put one of these sleeves through it, and then that'll be that. Okay, so we got it in there. It's just resting on a steel spacer for now, so I can get the height correct. I like that right there, that's nice. I like that clearance up there. I like all that clearance up there. I'm fine with the yoke clearance. I'm fine with the bell housing clearance. There's clearance right here above the steering rack. I was a little worried the drive shaft would run into the oil pan, but it doesn't. It still clears it by about 1/2 inch. The only place it's hitting at the moment is right here. So that's what's got to get clearanced out next. If I had to guess, I'd say over the course of this project, I put that diff in and out over 70 times. And it's not so bad when the gears aren't in it, but when it's complete with the carrier and all the gears, it easily weighs over 100 pounds. All right, enough dilly-dallying. It's time to just chop this front cross member up. I've tried every other way to retain it, but I just gotta pull the trigger, get crazy. So here we go. All right, next I'm gonna start plating these corners in. And then after that, I'm gonna put something across that can catch these bushings. All right, we're all welded up, and tomorrow I will continue. All right, so here's the original 1/4 inch plate that I shaped to hold the front diff mounts. I gotta go with a different program now. I'm still gonna do the same idea. It's gonna be something like this. So it fits a lot better. I'm still gonna cut the relief in there. I wasted some time making the first one, but it's just the process. I wouldn't have got to the second one if I didn't make the first one, so you gotta start somewhere. And in a case like this, a lot of people wouldn't even bother showing you the first one because it's like they're not using it. I feel like it helps to share the fact that you gotta make the first one to realize, oh, it's not gonna work. It's just steps, and that's why all the small failures end up to the success. It's a strange concept, but it helps a lot to think about it that way. So I'm gonna get this cut out of steel, and I'll be back. The reason that edge isn't flat and there's that shape cut out of it is so I can get the diff in and out. Top side and bottom side, all welded. I do need to still put some gussets there to make me feel great about it, but I feel good about it. So yeah, before this mount was like here, the ring gear and the carrier are mostly on this side. It just leaves it very uneven if you would ask me, so I shot it over 2 inches to try to get the same distance for the CV plugs in on that side and the CV plugs in on this side. Alright, so I got this mount screwed into the fixture table, perfectly level, and I have a line marking its current position, and I need to push the mounts over 2 inches. These holes happen to be on 2-inch centers, which is really convenient. Alright, so it's time to fuse these back together. I came up with this shape, and it's going to need to be thick, and the thickest stuff I have is 1 3/8. It's a press plate for my 20-ton press, and I hate to cut it up, but it's the only suitable steel. Alright, so here's what we're looking at. Spaced up perfectly. I'm going to have to do 1,000,000 passes. I realize this. Let's go. So what I ended up doing was finding a sleeve, and this guy is gonna go in here like this. So I'm sure you Sequoia guys, Tundra guys, Tacoma guys, 4Runner guys recognize this if you've ever been under your truck and done any work on the diff. This is the rear diff mount. This is an M12, I need an M14. So this is nice, it's actually 3 separate pieces. You got your cast piece and then your 2 rubber insulators. Thinking I can drill these out and put them to use. So I was able to open this hole to 14 millimeters to give you guys a better idea of what's going on here with this rear diff mount. So the sleeve is in there, so the bolt will go through, and then this first big washer I made out of 3/16 with a hole saw goes there. And then this is the rear mount out of the original diff that was in this truck, just cut up. So that'll isolate it a little bit. And then finally, to give it the tiniest little boost it needs so it doesn't hit the steering rack anymore, I got this Delrin spacer. And that's what's going on there. Alright, I think I have it set up, mocked up for the final time. I don't think I'm gonna get it any better than that. So I'm gonna punch some holes in that 1/4-inch plate and put some bolts through this baby. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my transfer punch. There we go. We got holes. We got mounting holes. 9/16 bolt, small washer, Toyota part, through the bushing, Delrin body lift spacer. For the other side of the hole, I got this really thick big boy washer and an nylock nut. Oh my God, holy crap, it's in there. Excuse me while I have a moment, but this has been a long time coming. This is insane. It's rock solid in there, wow. Absolutely brick. I think I'm gonna put a gusset here and a gusset here. They won't be the same size, unfortunately, but I think they'll help strengthen it up a lot. Okay, so here's the front diff mount finished. Gusset it up, 1/4 inch plate. All right, so I got the diff mocked up for the first time. I tried my Driveshaft, which is this one, which is actually from an 06 Tundra. When I did my FJ Cruiser transfer case, I needed a shorter Driveshaft by about 1 inch, and this one fit the bill, so I got this off eBay. Now what's happening is this end fits the transfer case, but this end does not fit the diff. Totally different pattern. So my thought was to take my old Sequoia Driveshaft, which is this one, and this one does fit. So I want to try swapping this one for this one. And what are these called? I keep calling them this. But yeah, you can see just visibly it's wider. So both these drive shafts had a 60mm bolt pattern on one end and a 66mm bolt pattern on the other. I needed a 66mm bolt pattern on both ends to make this work. So that's what's going on here. So 66, 60. I'm gonna hook the new one on. You would have like dwelled on it.
Like dwelled on it.
We got her. I need this arm, so I'm going to harvest it. I tried several ADD actuators and none of them would fit. There's just no room. So what I decided to do was make a permanent plate that locks the collar in the engaged position. I've done my research on these diffs and the FJ transfer case that I'm running, and this is totally fine to do. People have been doing it for hundreds of thousands of miles to no ill effect. So I got this plate fitting really well. So this would be the position of engaged. I'm just gonna have to cut that as true as I possibly can. So the shift fork goes on the collar. Put the plate on, which has a hole ready to be welded. So I'll finish welding this out. Nothing too crazy. It's the best I can think of right now to get my ass to the Rubicon. I'm happy with it. So for the CV axles, I had a couple choices. I could get custom axles made for $2,200, or I could buy 4 used CVs off eBay, cut them, weld them together, and then be done with it. If you guys have watched my channel before, you know this is a budget-minded channel, so I went for the eBay special. I did make sure they were Toyota factory CVs though, that was very important. I started off by tearing them down completely because when I weld the shafts, it's going to get hot, and I don't need a bunch of heat needlessly going into the cage, the race, the bearings, or the joints. But look at the angle on this thing. It's comfortable there. I mean, it's not great for it. You can see at that angle, the balls are like over halfway out, but an angle like this, and that's an impressive CV angle at full droop. That's some travel right there. Let's take this over and separate the shaft from the outer joint. The whole idea is you find a pipe that the shaft will fit in where there's room at the bottom. Just drop it. And FYI, this took 19 tries. the inner splines, and everything's still in its happy home. Next, I cut 2 shafts, wrapped them in some PVC, and just started measuring. I was cycling the suspension up and down, turning the wheels lock to lock, while keeping the inner joint at the center of its plunge depth. Here it is. Took a lot of work to get to this stage. Alright, so I got the ends ground to points, wrapped in angle iron and hose clamps, and I think this should be enough to at least get me going. We'll see. Gotta try it, right? Gotta try something. So when it comes to welding CVs together, there's really 2 camps that I found. Some people do it and swear that it works great, and other people say it'll break, it'll break, it'll break, it'll break. I think if I use the right technique and throw enough metal at it, it'll be fine. I'm not building a 1,000 horsepower rock bouncer over here. That being said, I always tend to learn things the hard way, so we'll see. It's going pretty good, just laying fat beads, trying to keep it even side to side. Then I just hit the axle one last time with the torch and rolled it up in the welding blanket to cool overnight. Alright, so it's 2 days later, and it seems to look pretty straight. It's not glaringly bent or warped. I'm going to grind this down because I do want to sleeve it. Proud to say it actually came out straight. I'm going to vise this up and cut a chunk. See what happens when I try to clamshell this around that axle. Alright, it's set up. Let's see if this works. So this is Dom tubing with an inner diameter of 1 inch and a wall thickness of 0.125. This is just an extra step to make sure these CVs have a fighting chance. And for the final touch, I'm going to do 3 plug welds on each side of each axle. And just for some reference, at the time of this video, I have several thousand street miles on these axles and a little over 100 miles of heavy off-roading with 0 issues. Using some RCV Ultimate Moly. And it looks like I'll be carrying 2 spare axles, as one is 1 inch longer than the other. So with the wheel at full driver lock, the CV boot contacts the bottom of the coilover, which I figured would happen. No sweat. So I'm gonna have to take the shock off and push the lower mounting surface back. And that's actually a good thing because the banjo bolt on the coilover is not my ideal steering stop. That would allow me to get rid of some of this preload anyway, so it's all good. Let's get the shock off. Dirty. There's the blank canvas. I also have some bump stops from Perry Parts to put up there. Then I'll actually have to put a little platform right here that'll meet up with the bump stop on compression. really easy to get the CVs in on this thing. After you undo these two 27mm bolts from the ball joint, you just open her up. And it just chills there. I call it Starfighter mode. Look. And I'm sorry about this glare on my phone, guys. I am still waiting on getting my camera screen replaced. Thank you, my friend.
Oh yeah.
So Michael just noticed that because on this spindle I don't have a steering stop anymore, my brake line was hitting my coilover. He was showing his girlfriend the spindle and he saw this, which is now right here, was just smashed to oblivion and leaking everywhere. So this was a pretty scary one, obviously. I'm glad it happened in the parking lot of our shop. I was able to get on it and fix it right away. My local O'Reilly's let me go into the back where they keep the brake lines and just look through each and every one to try to find something that had the correct length and the correct ends on it. And I finally landed on a RAV4 front brake line. I ordered some stainless steel RAV4 brake lines and they've been fine since. This all happened before I relocated the coilovers, so now the banjo bolts do not hit the coilovers even at full lock. For bump stops, I reached out to Patrick at Perry Parts. He's doing some really cool stuff right now, 3D printing bump stops for Toyota and other applications. He sent me a pair of his first gen Sequoia long travel bumps, so I screwed them in and quickly welded up some bump pads for them on my lower arm. These bumps start to hit as soon as the shock is almost compressed, so I'm not losing any up travel, and I'm happy to report I haven't had any tire rubbing or interference issues since installing these. At the beginning of this project, I split the diff open and removed the carrier to make it lighter for mock-up. So before installing the diff for the final time, I cleaned it up real well and rebuilt it. I replaced all the C-clips, both axle seals, and the bearing at the end of the intermediate shaft. I also took this opportunity to do something every late model IFS Toyota owner should do. I removed the needle bearing from the driver's side of the carrier and replaced it with the East Coast Gear Supply PTFE lined bronze bushing. There she is. There is a plethora of information about this swap on YouTube, but basically when you lift your truck, you create steeper CV angles. The needle bearing in the driver's side goes bad fast. It'll create noise and vibration when you drive. So not only does this bushing have no moving parts, it's completely strong and smooth, but as you can see it's taller, so it's more surface area for the CV to ride on to keep it more stable. I have no affiliation with East Coast Gear Supply, but I bought these for both my Gen 1 Sequoias and had great luck with them. So I'm doing it now while I got the chance. Is he giving you hell? A little bit. The alignment shop. This was a major source of frustration on this build. And this wasn't completely due to this swap. Alignments in big trucks are hard to get in general, but for some reason this time around I had to visit 4 alignment shops before I found my guy. And I found my guy. He knows all about front end IFS geometry. He knows how everything affects everything else. It was the best $150 I ever spent. So long putting this thing together, and then to not be able to enjoy driving it, it was killing me. The first shop took one look at it and wouldn't touch it. The second shop said he could do it, had it for 4.5 hours, and didn't charge me because he couldn't finish it. The third shop tried their best, but they didn't have the equipment to get the weight off the truck to align the front wheels properly. And at this point I'm getting worried. I mean, I made the spindles with my bare hands, but I did use a jig, so they can't be that far off. Finally I found my guy. It took him a little while, but he nailed it. I'm cruising down the road straight and smooth, and it turned out to be the closest shop to my house. I figured I'd throw this in because we've all probably struggled with this at one time or another. Keep searching, you'll find your guy too. Alright guys, if you've made it this far in the video, I just want to say thank you. This is one of the biggest projects I ever did, and it's the biggest video I've ever put together too. I'm happy to report that aside from a hose clamp coming loose and a CV boot spraying grease everywhere, I've had no problems with this front diff swap whatsoever. I've taken on 3 test runs, if you will, and I'm just going to throw some clips at the end here of the new diff in action. Added security that I have now in this truck, knowing that the diff is bigger, the CVs are bigger, it's like driving a whole new truck. I'll let a few more clips play, but I'm gonna sign off. You guys, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for commenting. And I'll see you guys later. Peace.